Hey there! Welcome to Spectrum Pulse, where we talk about music, movies, art, and culture, and it's a big one. We're going to be talking about the newest album from Karen Jonas, The Rise and Fall of American Kitsch. Okay, at this point I would argue that Karen Jonas has one of the most consistent but underappreciated catalogs in indie country. She doesn't have a bad album, and her voice and writing style are distinctly unique. And between 2014's Oklahoma Lottery, 2016's Country Songs, and her excellent project last year, The Restless, she really deserves more attention. Although I'm not exactly surprised that she hasn't gotten it. Aside from Karen Jonas's understated sultriness not always being the easiest sell compared to acts who have more strident singers, to say nothing of writing that tends to have a more detailed and biting edge, her sound has fluttered across hard scrabble acoustic textures, a more theatrical retro pop flair, and as of recently dipping into smooth jazz for a mature brand of sensuality that most mainstream country seems scared of approaching. And let me be candid, the indie country that has been allowed to cross over to the mainstream so far has been largely male-dominated, and with a specific sound and niche. There might be some common ground between themes between a Zach Bryan and Karen Jonas, but there's a pretty wide gap in aesthetic, and that's very telling if you've heard her catalog. So when I heard that her newest album was a more conceptual experiment, well, that was certainly intriguing. When you're a decade into releasing albums, why not think big? Aim for something a little bit more challenging. What do you have to lose? With a title that just might so happen to get confused with another critically acclaimed act right now and give some pop stans a welcome surprise. And make no mistake, the critical acclaim behind this, even from folks who normally sing her praises, it has picked up a different intensity. I was excited. So with all that in mind, what did we get? Okay, wow, this was one hell of a listen, and one where I have to stress, initially I wasn't quite enraptured. I love the idea of Karen Jonas making more of a concept album, but I wasn't initially sure how I love the execution and leaning on more traditional country structures, and that to me can feel a bit overplayed. But the more I have allowed this to sink in, especially with the boldness in how she ends it, this has me thinking it could be one of the best albums of 2024, regardless of genre, and quite possibly her best as well. The sort of culmination that merges her genre-bending experiments with the desperate edge of her debut project that's only appeared sparingly across her catalog. And as somebody who adores that debut album, still thinks up until this point it was her best, to hear her finally reach that crux point makes for a thrilling and bleakly timely album in ways that I did not expect at all. This is something special. And thus I want to tackle this a little differently. So let's start off with the central premise. American Kitsch, the latter word originating in Germany and often used to describe the cheap, mass-produced pop art that would surge in the 20th century thanks to the Industrial Revolution, the innovations in plastic production, and the rise of the middle class, especially in the United States in the mid-50s. Suddenly, there was a generation and class with disposable income that could afford luxuries without being beholden to taste and its ties to classes with money, where earnest enjoyment and the more base pleasures were prioritized. Now, it should be noted that this is a somewhat selective and inaccurate view of art history that leaves out a lot. The base pleasures prioritized in classical art, that spring to mind, to say nothing of movements that were branded as kitschy or in bad taste because they were outside of defined norms of quality, and that's just simply social constructs with their own exclusionary structure. I made an entire video essay on Justin Timberlake and his relationships to class and coolness that is rather relevant to this conversation, and frankly it's aged way better than I thought it would. So, kitsch as a whole often got associated with low art genres. Think science fiction, fantasy, melodramas, children's entertainment, especially if it was branded cheap in order to mass produce, which is also why a lot of political propaganda of a certain stripe was also branded as kitschy. But in the grand aspiration of the American tradition, a lot of folks gravitated towards that anyway. It was a sign of slight upward mobility in the time, that you could afford small luxuries that after the Great Depression and World War II, they might be a hopeful sign of something more. Was it often explicitly commodified? Culture at its most shallow and plastic? Yeah, sure, but that does not inherently devalue its emotional impact or how well it might succeed under its own standards, of which were often base entertainment, unwilling to really challenge the status quo, which is why whole swaths of country music were called kitschy for the longest time in decades. But that also doesn't damage any of its inherent value. It can still work in that framing. And look, Karen Jonas is acutely aware of some of those fuzzy contradictions. Throwback country textures recalling the 1950s and 60s, it could well come across as kitschy to someone who claims to have good taste or be on the cutting edge, which is a little too ironic given how camp can often be celebrated by said cutting edge, and the gap between kitsch and camp is slim indeed, with a lot of shared artistic and, let's be honest, economic ground. But Karen Jonas also gets what that kitsch represented very early. It was a promise of something more, and that's the first big trick of this album. If you're familiar with her delivery and stylism, especially her project from last year, you know Karen Jonas has good taste, both personal and in her art. Her softer delivery doesn't immediately slot that well into the bolder, warmer technicolor of retro sounds, which is why I also didn't quite love her 2018 album Butter as much that went full throwback, or her 2020 album The Southwest Sky and Other Dreams. But here she is using some of that tension to her advantage to highlight the sly contradiction. She's got the taste to know better, but she understands the pull of that middle American promise. The first half of this album highlights that aspirational drive to not just buy Cadillacs for parents on 4 Cadillacs with a huge brass section and sizzling guitar solo, but also for herself or her partner, and the gesture that they could take her to the moon, flush with the hope that came out of that era. And then you got Shake, Bump, and Grind Show, which is a deliberate reference to the king of American kitsch, Elvis Presley, where she plays the older figure who is railing at Elvis's ribald behavior, playing up to the teen greasers and American graffiti, but she also understands the power. She's the one playing the song, all smoky allure until it revs into a total jam on the back half. And hell, sometimes it's even more straightforward than that. The sandy and rollicking honky-tonk opener with plenty of saloon piano and jaunty fiddle, Rich Man's Valley, it falls into the tradition of road songs looking to travel west and make a fortune. Yeah, it can be corny to chase that, and nobody loves new money and their bad taste, but why the hell not? It might make anyone feel a little bit better. Let's try it. And that underlying emotional appeal is essential when we get to the next couple of songs. The second one being Let's Go to Hawaii, which might as well be a direct reference to the Hawaiian craze of the mid-50s, of which Elvis Presley was a part, but the first being Gold in the Sand, which is all about gambling in Las Vegas, and Elvis is getting referenced directly. But both songs are also very revealing if you look between the lines. The Jimmy Buffett-esque Let's Go to Hawaii, it wants to focus on that vacation, but it can't help but reference that really it's a desperate swing for her and her partner to fall in love again amidst the dreary boredom of commodified white picket fence suburbia. And Gold in the Sand reminds me a lot of the darkest moments in Oklahoma Lottery. Karen Jonas has written about gambling and losing money before, and even if you're dazzled by the tourist trap of Las Vegas or a momentary winning on DraftKings, the bleak existential underbelly is very much in frame. Diamonds and dust, silver and rust, mostly a losing town. And yet she is still trying to hope amidst the gleaming piano and somber acoustics and fiddle, and it gets a lot sadder. I mean, you can argue that this might as well be the larger critique of the American dream, but she's leaving it in the subtext, mostly because the sarcasm is tinted by that weary desire to keep believing. To expand on an observation from Ian Danskin that's always stuck with me, she knows that necessarily not everybody's gonna beat the odds, because that's how odds work, but when you're desperate, you're trying to play those odds anyway. And even if your victories are minor and, say, you buy a yard full of plastic Pink Flamingos on the impeccably jaunty song of the same name, full of terrific guitar work, and of which I'm fairly certain it's not an explicit John Waters reference, although Kitsch can fall into his unique wheelhouse as well, even if you know they stick out and they might offend the better taste of everyone else, you're gonna cling to them because it is a hard-fought victory. It's yours, they're yours. And you watch as pride might devolve into paranoia, where she's on the porch with a shotgun guarding her lawn ornaments. Now, this is the centerpiece of the project, and where it also turns into much darker territory, through the acknowledgement that buying into all of this kitsch It's a dream, but it's not exactly really helping to soothe the pain or emptiness within. So naturally you get the swampy, hazy swerve into pharmaceuticals on Call Dr. Nick, the very obvious darker side of the Elvis reference. Although the line, "as long as you're not poor," that's a gut punch echoing the hell of the American healthcare system that I nearly missed until I heard it and then I couldn't stop hearing it. Or where the edgy royal of black jacket, red guitar with that terrific bass line tells that you can only cover up that pain with stylism for so long, playing into the stereotypes of that American dream that can start feeling hollowed out. And then you get the haunted guitar and brassy flash of Mama's Gone, where the maternal figure dies too early. And it also happens to be another Elvis Presley reference with the echo of alcohol poisoning that took his mother. And this is where I want to observe how Kitsch, it's most often sold to women. As much as class and taste is often branded as rational and masculine, the plastic commodification of the kitsch, that's for the home. It plays to emotionality, it was most pressed on women. If you buy into this, you're gonna be happy. You'll fill the role, your man is gonna appreciate you. It'll save your marriage and family. You just have to keep on buying. But in this album's darkest turn in the final 3 songs, she does keep buying. Online shopping is an inspired jump to the present day, with a retro girl group snap and bass line with remarkably infectious guitar and pedal steel interplay, where she's drunk in the middle of the night and she's hitting up Amazon for whatever cheap conveniences that she can afford. Why go outside? Why be awkward and interact with the hostile, messy world when you can get all manner of little pleasures in the comfort of your own home that you don't even need, but if you're in the bath with a bottle of wine and your phone and laptop at the ready, they might work to make you happy, right? Well, in the next track, that veil is getting violently ripped away. American Kitsch, largely a piece of spoken word poetry amidst the distant smoky guitar, and you get a gaze into that abyss. So much kitsch reveals itself to be trash that never mattered and ever growing but decaying piles, cheap trends that wound up in a landfill. A $1,300 wedding dress for a failed marriage where the money could have been spent on rent, where dopamine is cheap and America's real good at offering it up, be it wasting away again in Margaritaville, or at Disney World wishing that all of your dreams might come true. But kitsch is also a lot more fun when you have that money to spend, when you can repair your car, see through the windshield for a better tomorrow. And even then, she knows that American brand of kitsch, it prizes youth and vibrancy, and she's getting older and can't cover that. And even hoping that her art will save her, where she doesn't need to buy anything more, she knows that's hollow too. She writes affirmations on a piece of paper and sets it on fire. And if the album ended there, hell, even compared to Mountainhead by Everything Everything and Dark Times by Vince Staples, I could probably call this the bleakest album I had heard all year. But the truth is that emotional resonance of that kitsch, it did linger. She hates and she loves it, and she hates that she loves it. And the album ends on the acoustic song Bye, the most confessional moment where everything that she was blunting across the album roars to the forefront. Poverty, low-paying jobs, hard retail work, depression, alcohol abuse, healing that probably requires therapy that she can't afford. And amidst all of it, a yearning for something more. And there's a stark difference between looking to buy something now in comparison with the decades past in that kitschy veneer. It might provide some shoddy escapism, but she's not running away from the problems. I mean, she might daydream about traveling the country for free or getting all her financial problems wiped away in a rich marriage, but she's more realistic than that. And moreover, she knows the struggle is partially to keep on dreaming. And if buying something small was what inspires her to do it, where because you can afford it, it means a little more, why not? And it's where taste equivocation with class to marginalize that kitsch picks up a different bite. I mean, it's easy to be snobby at the plastic tackiness of the nouveau riche. A whole lot harder when the person's worked a whole lot harder to even get there, and it feels so much more precarious, especially when she reveals that she's got the taste and wit and wisdom, all those intangibles, to fit in amongst them regardless. If only that was actually enough to realize the American dream in 2024. If only. Now, this is where I can make the argument that this album on some level is hitting a lot of similar notes to Karen Jonas's catalog in the past, especially around playing that losing game but you still desperately cling to hope, or taking it a step further, why it doesn't opt for the summation of that societal critique that's blaring up from every bit of the subtext. And you know, while I get both points, I think they both ironically miss the emotional core of the album, which does echo themes on a bigger pedestal but never loses sight of its populism and intimate framing. Karen Jonas's storytelling has echoes to both past and present, but she's more interested in observing how it impacts someone's life within the system, for better or for worse, rather than a broadside against that system. And I gotta be honest, it feels a lot more lived in and real, and provides the starkest emotional gut punch moments. You gotta remember there are people living here. But as such, folks, this is one of the best albums of 2024. Hands down. The sort of ambitious, gorgeously textured, deftly written, and beautifully performed record that feels like it has all come together. And while the Restless and country songs might show a more sultry side that I also adore, this feels like Karen Jonas at her best. Even in some indie country circles, this is probably gonna fly under the radar. It really shouldn't. Please, folks, check this out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you want to see more, please be sure to like, share, drop comments, subscribe. Gotta be honest, it took me a little while to fully click with this, but I'm so happy I did, and there's such great layers to this conversation. I'm really thrilled how well this project ended, really helped it stick for me, even as somebody who doesn't really have that same draw to specifically branded American Kitsch. I mean, I'm Canadian. We have Canadian Kitsch up here. You got like Beavers and the Maple Leaf and the Toronto Maple Leafs, to actually speak on that. Beyond that, though, outside of Canadian Kitsch, if y'all want to get involved in helping support the channel beyond just buying merch, or you want to like get involved in my scheduling process or argue with me on my Discord, again, I'm pointing at Patreon right now, but the one thing I have to say with that is, given some of the instability on that platform and their desire to push all of us to a per subscription model that would devastate our revenue models, that's a really bad thing, and ironic that I'm talking about it on a project with so much economic uncertainty that now echoes in a certain amount of meta text into what I'm dealing with right now. Fortunately, I got a little bit of breathing room, and I ultimately will be okay, but again, this is going to blow up as a little bit more of this bleeds out every single day. Finally, the mainstream media is talking about it, not a moment too soon. We'll have to see where this all goes. I have some faith in the process, but it's flickering a little bit, all I'll say there. But again, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.